Hey guys, tonight we're slipping out of the ordinary and into something hushed, fragrant, and faintly smoky. You're stepping barefoot into a world of oiled wood and creaking floorboards where every breath feels like a ritual. And the tea isn't just a drink, it's an invitation to slow time down. The air smells like cedar and old paper. You brush aside a reed curtain. The lights dim, almost reverent. Lanterns flicker like shy fireflies along a narrow path. The mat beneath your feet is woven tight and dry, whispering its own greeting. You're in a 12th century Japanese tea house now, formally, spiritually, and probably barefoot, which is a pretty dangerous thing in a place where you're one slipper slide away from slapping into a noblewoman with 10 hairpins. This isn't your average hangout. Back then, life outside these walls was brutal feudal lords, clashed peasants toiled, and your average cold could earn you a quick funeral. But inside here, peace, order, and just enough snobbery to keep things spicy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel stretches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't enter the tea house, you're absorbed by it. A sliding door parts barely wide enough to sidle through. Your hands hover instinctively by your sides. The low ceiling nudges your posture into humility. You bow out of habit even if no one sees you. The entrance is called the Nijiriguchi, barely waist-high by design. Even the mighty bend here. Samurai must remove their swords. Wealth means nothing. No one strolls into sacred simplicity. The interior is more space than stuff. Tatami mats line the floor in exacting order, no edges misaligned. Every mat measures 3 feet by 6. They're not just flooring, they're furniture. You sit, kneel, and sometimes nod off on them. Each mat has rules. You don't step on the edges unless you're feeling especially rebellious or unaware, which is worse. The first thing you hear is silence. Not the kind that's empty, but the kind that's full of things not said. The rustle of fabric, a distant kettle sighing, the faint tap of a bamboo dipper returning to its bowl. This is a place built for focus, but not the shouty kind. Your mind quiets whether you like it or not. At the center is the hearth, a sunken square called the row. It's not lit right now, but you can smell yesterday's charcoal, a trace of pine smoke still lingering in the grains of the floor. In winter, it'll be the heartbeat of the room. In summer, they cover it with a panel and pretend not to miss it. On one wall, there's a single scroll, pale ink on rice paper. No elaborate dragons, just a single character moo meaning nothingness. The more you look at it, the more it says. Or maybe less. That's the point. Above the scroll is a simple flower arrangement. Wild grasses, perhaps. Placed precisely to look accidental. One blossom leans at an angle that took an hour to decide. The room itself has no decorations except this one sacred corner, the tokonoma. Guests will spend entire evenings not looking at it while definitely looking at it. You shuffle to your knees on the mat, bow slightly, and place your hands neatly in your lap. You're here as an apprentice, or maybe a ghost. Time behaves strangely in these walls. Historians still argue whether tea houses of the 1100s were truly this minimalist, or whether later aesthetics were retroactively applied. But what's certain is that the roots of Chanoyu, or the way of tea, were taking hold. Now early, informal, deeply spiritual. Imported tea leaves were rare. Pulverized green matcha hadn't yet been commercialized. Serving tea was still more temple than trend. And temples did have influence. Many early tea houses were linked to Zen monasteries. That hush you feel pressing against your temples. It's religious in origin. Tea wasn't for thirst, it was for meditation, for awakening, or for pretending to be more awake than you really are, which is a sacred skill too. You think about how this place was likely built, not quickly, not casually. Wood chosen from forests with prayer, bamboo cut on certain moon phases, thatched roof layered thick enough to muffle even the cicadas. It didn't cost much, but it cost everything in terms of time, precision, and intention. The floor creaks lightly as someone passes beyond the paper wall. You freeze instinctively, unsure if you should rise, bow, or dissolve into the floorboards. It's your first day, or maybe your first lifetime. Here, time gets measured in cups and silences. Your master, the tea host, hasn't arrived yet, but his presence fills the room like steam. You'll meet him soon enough. For now, all you need to do is stay still, breathe softly, and try not to knock over anything with your knee. Outside, the sun inches upward, catching on the dew-wet roof tiles. Somewhere in the courtyard, a wind chime tinkles lazily. A sparrow peeks through the open eaves, decides this place is far too uptight, and flits off. Inside, your back is starting to ache. Welcome to serenity. The sun hasn't fully broken through the mist yet, but inside the tea house, the morning is already underway. You're awake, though you wouldn't quite call it alert. There's sleep in your eyes and possibly a spider in your sleeve, but none of that matters. It's time to grind the tea. You shuffle to the preparation corner, rubbing warmth into your palms. The mill is simple, 2 grooved granite discs stacked atop each other. You pour in roasted green tea leaves, still pungent and curling slightly from their bamboo container, then begin to turn the upper stone. It groans quietly like an old man remembering an argument. This is not a fast task. If you go too quickly, the tea gets warm and bitter. If you go too slow, you'll be here until winter. So you settle into a rhythm circle, breathe circle, yawn, and try not to sneeze from the green dust puffing out between the stones. One rogue snort, and you'll be exhaling matcha powder for hours. The ground tea will become usucha, or thin tea, a frothy pale green suspension served in specific contexts. The thicker, stronger koicha, reserved for formal gatherings, requires leaves of finer grade and hands less jittery than yours. Today, you're preparing the everyday brew, still sacred but slightly less terrifying. Your senior, a 4th-year apprentice, passes behind you, offering no help and a double helping of judgment. His hair is perfect. His robe folds crisply. His job appears to be floating silently and sighing near imperfect technique. You wonder if he has a secret stash of pre-ground tea or if he simply achieved enlightenment through passive aggression. The kettle, an iron kama, is already warming above the hearth. Its lid trembles slightly. That's your cue to begin your next chore: ladle water with the hishaku, a bamboo scoop that somehow splashes everywhere, unless you're born with hands made of swan feathers. You pour the first water into the shawan, the tea bowl. It's large, ceramic, and subtly asymmetrical, like it's been melted just a little. That imperfection, intentional, wabi-sabi. Beauty in the flawed, which is lucky for you because your wrists are shaking, and that pour was far from textbook. A soft cloth called a chakin rests nearby. You use it to wipe the bowl, not quite elegantly. Then you warm the chase in a whisk of finely cut bamboo bristles. It looks like a sea urchin and costs more than your entire outfit. You'll be responsible for one soon. Try not to snap it, or think about snapping it. Outside, a distant rooster makes the mistake of announcing himself. A hawk cries back. Somewhere the cooks laugh at a joke that definitely involves you. Inside, it's just you and the whisper of water, the aroma of toasted leaves, and the knowledge that the tea master will soon inspect your work. You whisk the powder into the hot water using a motion not unlike scribbling angry poetry. It foams, not too much, not too little. You strain your eyes trying to judge the froth's consistency. Is it too large bubbled, too pale? Is this a metaphor for your life? Historians still argue whether apprentices in this period made tea primarily for practice or were expected to serve lower-ranked visitors. Some records imply a rigid hierarchy, no touching the whisk until year 2. Others suggest even novices might serve during quiet hours, if under supervision and threat of poetic reprimand. Speaking of supervision, your master enters silently. He wears a dark indigo kimono, with sleeves just slightly longer than functional. He glances at your bowl. He says nothing. That's either good or the prelude to a week of extra sweeping. With a slow motion, he raises one eyebrow and sits. You slide the bowl toward him on both palms. You bow forehead to mat. You wait. There is no well done. There is only slurping, or worse, not slurping. He lifts the bowl, inspects it as if it contains not tea, but omens. He sips. The pause is surgical. Then a single nod. Not big, not small, like a ripple in a still pond. You did fine, or perhaps you failed so elegantly it impressed him. You won't know, you're not supposed to. Your arms relax by a degree. You try to hide your pride behind a bland facial expression. You've been practicing the look of someone who has no ego, but also secretly nailed it. Outside, the mist is lifting. Light begins to filter through the paper screens, turning everything gold for just a moment. You return to your millstone, newly humbled, newly energized, newly aching in places you forgot you had joints. This is morning in the tea house, not loud, not fast, but deeply, thoroughly alive. And guess what? That was the easy part. There's no job description for a tea house apprentice. If there were, it would probably read, must enjoy kneeling, being corrected without being spoken to, and mastering complex rituals while pretending not to sweat. You wake earlier than the sun, sleep later than the crickets. And in between, you're everyone's invisible helper. Need the floor brushed in precise diagonal strokes. That's you. Fresh water for the mizusashi. You're running to the well. A guest sneezes and someone must silently appear with a hand towel embroidered with the kanji for grace. Somehow, that's also you. But your most important duty is not messing up the vibe. The tea house doesn't run on tea. It runs on atmosphere. Every element must be balanced, the light, the heat, the tone of every clink, every pour. You clumsy creature of good intentions and stiff joints must make sure your presence doesn't tilt the balance. Today, your senior apprentice assigns you to slipper duty. That means you sit just outside the Nijiriguchi, the crawl-sized entrance, ensuring that when guests arrive, their sandals are received with reverence, straightened precisely, and swapped for guest slippers made of woven rush that never quite fit anyone's foot. You handle each pair like sacred artifacts, even the ones that smell like regret. One pair belongs to a young noble. They're lacquered red with silk thread toes and cost more than your entire village makes in a month. As you line them up, you feel the weight of status in your hands and immediately worry you're holding them wrong. From behind the screen you hear laughter, low, elegant, Someone important is inside already, and the tea master is making them laugh without actually being funny. That's another skill you're expected to learn, delivering spiritual insights wrapped in mildly smug metaphors. A guest arrives, a woman. This time she glides, doesn't walk. Her sleeves trail like mist. Her eyes barely scan the room, but she sees everything. You bow low, head nearly to floor, hands flat on the mat. She doesn't acknowledge you. That's normal. Recognition is reserved for those who've earned presence. You scurry back behind the wall where you're allowed to breathe again. The senior glances at your bowed head and gives you a subtle, nearly imperceptible nod. Translation: You didn't embarrass us today. Progress. Historians still argue whether the apprentice structure of early Japanese tea culture was this strictly hierarchical, or whether these rules were codified later during the more ritual-heavy Muromachi period. What's certain is that training under a master wasn't optional. It was considered part of your spiritual purification. Your master believes in teaching through silence. If you ask a question, he might answer, or he might walk away while softly reciting a poem about mountains that don't respond to shouting. So you learn through watching. How he handles a chawan, not with grip, but with reverence. How he folds the fukusa, the silk cloth used to purify the utensils, so slowly it might be mistaken for meditation. How he listens when someone speaks, eyes lowered, but fully alert. At night, when the guests have left and the lamps are dim, he lets you clean. This is not a punishment. It's a promotion. To clean the tea room is to engage with it on an intimate level. You lift each utensil with the care of a surgeon, and in doing so you memorize their weight, their imperfections. There's one guest who returns often, a retired court musician who smells of incense and plums. He jokes that you remind him of his nephew, which is confusing because he never had one. He says he comes here for the tea, but you've watched him sip only once every visit. Mostly he watches the steam rise. Today he speaks as he leaves. That lad has good hands. Your master grunts either in agreement or because his back hurts. Either way, your heart inflates. Later you help set the table for a kaiseki-style light meal. You place pickled plum delicately atop rice molded by hand into a shape that resembles the crescent moon. You fold the napkin into a crane. You remind yourself that in this world, precision is love. Still, you make mistakes. You knock over the ladle once while pouring water. It clatters, not loudly, but enough. No one scolds you. No one speaks. But you feel it, every eye flicking toward the sound, every mind recentering the moment. That's your real job, to disappear. To make yourself so attuned, so precise, that your absence becomes part of the room's calm. You are not here to shine. You are here to not disrupt the shine of others. A fringe anecdote you once heard from an elder: one tea master was so skilled he could enter and exit the tea room without shifting a single speck of ash in the hearth. Another claimed to hear a guest's intentions by the angle of their bow. True or not, they give you something to aspire to, or at least something to think about while scrubbing the kettle with salt. By the time night folds over the garden like a silk cloth, you're exhausted. Your knees ache, your wrists throb, but as you stand in the threshold looking at the warm glow inside the tea house, you feel oddly proud, not because you were seen, but because you kept the silence intact. You've been here long enough now that you stop noticing how quiet the tea house is, until you step outside and realize how loud the world can be. Inside, every element conspires to hush you. The walls are shoji thin wooden frames holding translucent rice paper. They breathe light like lungs, softening the sun into a golden whisper. You can see shadows move behind them, but never details, just outlines. Enough to know you're not alone, never enough to intrude. The structure itself is deliberately modest. Cedar beams, tatami mats, clay plaster walls with the occasional streak from a former earthquake left unrepaired as a gesture of humility. The ceiling is low, almost enough to make you duck, even if you're not tall. It brings the room down to human scale, forcing intimacy, grounding conversation. The windows, if they can even be called that, are more gaps than glass, narrow slits, designed to frame nature like paintings. One captures a branch in bloom, another frames the edge of a stone lantern now mossy with age. They don't let the world in. They just offer it to you in slices. Every corner is calibrated for stillness. The tea house was never built for comfort. It was built for concentration. And you feel that now in your back, your hips, your ankles, especially your ankles. You've sat in Caesar kneeling posture for so long, you're convinced your legs are filing complaints with your brain. But there's no escaping the architecture. It's not just physical, it's emotional. The layout guides how people interact. There's no grand central hall, just a series of narrow chambers, open areas. And the chashitsu, the main tea room, which is barely 6 feet square, that's not a flaw, that's the point. Because in a small space, everything matters. You don't stride here, you glide, you don't speak, you gesture, you don't just sit, you place yourself. Historians still argue whether the minimalism of these early tea houses was born of religious ideals or practical constraints. Zen monks favored simplicity, sure, but wood and stone were also expensive. Yet somehow less became more. A blank wall became a canvas for light. An empty alcove became a shrine for silence. You're taught to treat every threshold like a temple gate. You bow before entering any space, even storage rooms. Every time you touch a door or a utensil, your fingers must convey intention, not just function. And yes, that includes sliding a fusuma, a papered door panel, without making that nails on bamboo squeal you dread. Even the floor tells stories. Tatami mats aren't uniform. Some are older, some newer, and you're not supposed to step on the seams if you can help it. It's superstition for some, tradition for others. Either way, it's yet another thing to think about while carrying a bowl of steaming tea across the room with your elbows glued to your ribs. There's a moment every afternoon when the light strikes the room just right, soft and golden through the western wall. It lands on the scroll in the tokonoma, casting the calligraphy's shadow down the wall like it's still writing itself. If you're lucky, the breeze carries in the faint smell of crushed pine needles from the garden. And for a moment, the architecture isn't just shelter. It's mood, it's memory, it's pause. The tea master sometimes stands in the corner during this time, sipping slowly, watching the light move like an invisible brush. You once saw him adjust the angle of a single branch in a flower arrangement. Not to make it more beautiful, but to make it more honest. He didn't explain. He doesn't have to. A quirky tale floats among the apprentices. One tea house was built with a crooked floor beam, not by mistake, but as a gesture of humility. They say a guest tripped over it, spilled the tea, and ended up writing a poem that made the master weep. No one remembers the guest's name. Everyone remembers the beam. That's what the tea house teaches you in its own slow, silent way. Beauty isn't symmetrical. It's situational. It's accidental. It's in the way shadows fall, or how the paper screens shimmer when someone passes behind them like a ghost on an errand. You once spotted a spider web in the corner of the ceiling. Your first instinct was to swat it down before anyone noticed. But then the master glanced up, saw it, and said, "It stays." That web is still there. Maybe it's a metaphor. Maybe it's just a lazy house spider. Either way, you've stopped questioning it. At night, the architecture hums, not with sound, but with temperature. The thatched roof traps warmth just long enough. The clay walls radiate coolness just as the lanterns warm your hands. It's never fully comfortable, but always just close enough. You wonder what it would be like to live in a space like this, full-time, not visit, not study, not serve, just exist. Would you become quieter, gentler? Would your thoughts slow to match the cadence of water boiling or bamboo tapping? You don't know yet. But you do know this, even when you leave the tea house, it doesn't really leave you. You'll walk through forests and start noticing how the leaves fall with rhythm. You'll sit by a river and think about bowls. You'll hear silence and wonder what it's trying to tell you. All this from wood and paper and a handful of rules passed down through sideways glances. The tea house doesn't need to shout. It already knows you're listening. You're getting better at spotting the moment just before water sings. It starts with the faintest quiver in the kettle, a shimmer that rises not from the heat, but from memory. Then a low hum like a sleeping bell. The iron begins to whisper, and your hands move before you think. You've learned to respond to what hasn't happened yet. Today, you're studying the tea itself. The leaves arrive wrapped in silk, stitched closed with care, and stored in wooden boxes that smell faintly of sandalwood and stories. When you open them, it feels like unsealing a sacred scroll. The powdered green inside is soft, luminous, more pigment than food. You're holding something that's been boiled, dried, roasted, crushed, sifted, and blessed with ridiculous expense. Matcha in the 12th century is still rare. It's just beginning its transformation from imported medicine to cultural obsession. Your master says you're not merely making a beverage, you're extracting spirit from plant. You nod solemnly. You don't entirely understand, but the tea does smell amazing. There's a legend about how tea first came to Japan, how a monk named Aizai brought seeds from China along with Buddhist scrolls and an alarming caffeine tolerance. Historians agree he was real, but whether he said tea is the ultimate mental and medical remedy while balanced on one sandal and staring at the moon, that part remains delightfully unverified. Your job today is to observe 10 bowls of tea, each prepared slightly differently. Too hot, the tea burns, turns bitter dyes. Too cold, the powder floats like green snow, never melting into the water's soul. Too much powder, pasty and overbearing. Too little, weak as diluted gossip. You watch your senior apprentice prepare a bowl perfectly, almost smugly, and then another where he intentionally botches the whisking. The difference is subtle but unmistakable. The perfect bowl gleams, the failed one sulks. Then it's your turn. You measure, you sift, you warm the chawan with water so hot it stings your fingertips. You add the powder, then the water. You whisk in a controlled zigzag, like writing the character for person who's had too much plum wine, your master once joked. Foam blooms, light, even, no bubbles large enough to qualify as land masses. You place the bowl down in front of the master, turn it precisely 90 degrees, symbolic, graceful, and bow. He lifts it, sips, pauses, then That hum is neither good nor bad, it simply exists, like a cloud. You take it as a passing grade. Your senior rolls his eyes. You feel victorious. The master leans in. Tea, he says, is 10 virtues, most of them invisible. He doesn't elaborate, of course he doesn't. But you know some of them already: humility, presence, grace, cleanliness, timing, intent, stillness, heat, silence. And the 10th, humor, the retired court musician whispers from behind a screen. But no one ever admits that one. Historians still argue which virtues the early tea practitioners held most dear, whether it was more a matter of spiritual discipline or aesthetic balance. Some documents suggest that brewing tea was once considered a healing art. Others treat it more like social fencing, where a well-placed sip could signal diplomacy or defiance. You've seen both. There was a time last month when a nobleman visited, complained the tea was too weak, and your master merely smiled and said, "It reflects the hour." Somehow this both insulted and flattered the man into total silence. You hope one day to be that dangerous with a teapot. Each type of bowl brings a different mood. Rough ceramic with thick lips, earthy, grounding. Smooth porcelain painted with cranes, formal, flirtatious. You learn which guests prefer which, though they never say so aloud. One quirky tidbit: you love some tea bowls are given names, actual names, like pets or favorite swords. There's a charcoal glazed bowl here called Evening Cloud, another known as Widow's Ash. No one explains who named them. You just whisper their names like passwords before pulling them from the shelf. And every now and then a guest requests a specific one not to drink from, just to see it again. Like visiting an old friend. You start to realize how many layers there are. Not just waterleaf foam, but memory, ritual, intention, and unspoken rules you only discover after you break them. Today, you almost set the natsume, the tea caddy, down with your left hand. Your senior inhaled so sharply it felt like a vacuum opened beside you. You corrected instantly, bowing an apology without a word. The master merely nodded. "Left is shadow," he muttered. "Right is light." You don't argue. Later, when polishing the utensils, you pause to admire your reflection in the side of the comma. It's warped and fogged, but you can still see yourself, tired, alert, more patient than yesterday. The kettle begins to sing again, and you move instinctively. There's a rhythm to the day now. You move in time with heat, with silence, with the swirl of green in your bowl. You haven't spoken in hours. You feel entirely awake. The door slides open like a whisper with intent, and in they come 3 noble women wrapped in layered silks. Their movements so smooth it's as if their feet don't actually touch the floor. Their expressions neutral, serene, and possibly bored, or furious, or somewhere between. With noble women, it's all about opacity. You scramble to your position behind the screen, heart pounding like you just broke a priceless vase again. Your role right now is simple: watch, serve, and absolutely do not speak unless directly addressed, which is almost statistically impossible. They kneel with practiced grace. Their sleeves trail delicately behind them, like ink strokes on rice paper. You can smell the perfume, something floral and powdered, subtle, but designed to linger in the memory long after they've gone. That's the point. Everything they do is layered: scent, gesture, glance. The senior apprentice kneels nearby, poised to guide the ceremony. You watch every movement. The folding of the fukusa, the silk cloth used to purify utensils, is a dance of invisible beats. One mistake, a corner slightly misaligned, a whisk turned even 1 degree wrong, and the entire aesthetic balance trembles. You bow with the grace of someone trying not to faint. One of the noble women flicks her gaze toward you barely, and for a moment you are absolutely certain you've just been excommunicated from elegance. But then she smiles, slight, a twitch, really, gone in a blink. You have no idea if that means she's pleased, amused, or calculating your family's rice yield. You offer the sweets wagashi shaped like chrysanthemums and filled with bean paste that somehow tastes like melancholy and autumn winds. The guest lifts one delicately with her lacquered chopsticks. She eats in 3 silent bites. Your job is to notice without reacting. Now comes the tea. The master himself enters, sleeves whispering against the floor. He carries the chawan as if it were holding moonlight. Everything slows. He bows. They bow. The room is thick with tension disguised as poise. He prepares the tea before them. Ladle pour, whisk, breathe. Each step calibrated for maximum serenity. No sudden movements, no wasted energy. He places the bowl before the eldest woman. It's rotated just so the front of the bowl, the decorative side facing her, because of course tea bowls have personalities and preferred camera angles. She lifts the bowl with 2 hands, turns it slightly clockwise, never counterclockwise, and sips. Historians still argue whether these early tea gatherings, especially with female nobles, were truly centered around Zen-like introspection, or if they were more political in nature, ritualized gossip sessions disguised as spiritual detachment. Some scrolls hint that alliances were born over shared tea. Others imply passive-aggressive warfare conducted with fan flicks and eyebrow lifts. Today it seems more poetic than political, but you don't trust appearances anymore. After the tea silence, the noble women exchange glances. No one speaks. No one needs to. Then one of them compliments the flower arrangement in the tokonoma. You hold your breath. Because commenting on the chabana, the tea flowers, is a loaded move. If she loves it, she's saying the host has good taste. If she finds it interesting, she's saying it looks like it fell in by accident. And if she says nothing at all, that's the worst of all. Today's wild grass bends most gracefully, she says, voice like brushed silk. Everyone exhales, but quietly. The tea master bows. You mentally note that the grasses must have been arranged with near telepathic accuracy. You still can't tell one weed from another. Later, as the women rise to leave, you're called forward. Your task: retrieve the used chawan and bow without knocking it into your own kneecap. You manage it, barely. As you return behind the screen, your pulse slows. You did it. You served tea to nobility and didn't spill anything, drop anything, or die. A quirky tale circulates among apprentices about a tea gathering where a noblewoman sipped from her bowl and simply said, "I taste thunder." Everyone froze. No one knew if it was praise or a warning. The host immediately changed the flower arrangement and apologized to the clouds. You begin to understand what that means now, because in this room everything speaks, especially the things no one says. When the noble women leave, their sandals are waiting outside, arranged by you earlier in quiet formation. You catch a glimpse of embroidered hems as they vanish into the garden path, sleeves swaying like calm waves. The room feels different after they go. Not quieter, just changed, as if the tea house itself has absorbed their presence and is digesting the moment. The master pours himself a final bowl. Alone now, the movements are looser, less theatrical. He drinks in 3 steady sips. "They'll be back," he says softly to no one in particular. You begin cleaning the utensils more slowly this time. There's a lingering scent in the air, jasmine and roasted tea. You pause, look around, and realize something strange. This small, silent room just taught you more about status, power, and control than any scroll or soldier ever could. He ducks through the Nijiraguchi with a grunt, and suddenly the air feels heavier. A samurai has arrived. He's broad, blunt, and wrapped in layers of dark blue and gray. A blade longer than your forearm rests on the stand just outside, as custom demands no steel may cross into the tea room. But still his presence feels armed, not hostile, but dense, like someone who is used to rooms rearranging themselves around him. You're already kneeling at your post. You bow so low your forehead grazes the mat. He doesn't acknowledge it, not because he's rude, but because this entire setting exists to smooth the spikes off people like him. The tea house, after all, was designed to humble. The samurai sits awkwardly at first. The seiza position doesn't seem built for someone whose job involves galloping and stabbing. You can tell by the way his knees shift that he's either deeply uncomfortable or one wrong move from groaning out loud. But slowly he softens. You've seen it before. Warriors come in taut with authority, expecting to dominate the space. But the tea room doesn't allow it. There's no place to stand tall. No booming voice is welcome. No retainer trailing behind to bark instructions. Just tatami steam and a tea master who treats everyone like a leaf in hot water. Today the samurai has come alone. That's significant. It means he's either here to think, to make a decision, or to escape one. The master begins the ceremony. Movements slow. Whisk, pour, bow. Every gesture is smooth, intentional. The samurai watches, blinking slowly. He doesn't speak. His hands rest atop his knees like anchors. You wonder what's going through his mind. Is he calculating troop movements, remembering a death, practicing the delicate dance of staying politically relevant while pretending not to care? There's a reason samurai came to tea houses. Beyond politics, beyond aesthetics here, they were permitted to not be samurai for an hour. They could unlace their roles, if not their robes. Tea culture offered refuge from the blood and banners. Historians still argue about the timing. Some claim this fusion of samurai and tea didn't fully flower until later centuries, especially under tea luminary Sen no Rikyu. But there's little doubt that even in the 12th century, elite warriors were beginning to engage with the quiet arts, seeking in ritual the clarity they couldn't find in court or combat. You offer the sweet red bean and plum. The samurai accepts it with surprising delicacy. Not a word, just a nod. You bow in return. A few heartbeats later, the tea is served. The shawan is plain, rustic, a deep clay brown with a thumbprint on the side. It's said to have been crafted by a blind monk. It's heavy, grounding, the perfect bowl for a man who holds lives in the arc of his wrist. He turns it, sips, and for just a moment his shoulders drop. You almost miss it, but it's there, a breath, a letting go, like he's not tasting tea but remembering something or forgetting something else. The master sits opposite, silent. He doesn't fill the space with platitudes. He lets the room speak instead. A fly buzzes against the paper wall. Somewhere outside a crow cackles. Inside steam curls upward in spirals that seem to mimic thought. Then the samurai speaks just once. "You ever kill a man with tea?" The master raises an eyebrow. "Not lately." A pause. They both laugh, soft, deep, unguarded. Not mockery, not menace, just two men sharing a moment beyond their armor. It's strange how powerful this room becomes when it does nothing. You remember a story the senior apprentice once told about a general who wept after drinking tea. claiming it was the only time in his life he had been offered something with no expectation of return. You thought it was just drama. Now you're not so sure. The samurai finishes his tea and sets the bowl down carefully, precisely. He bows. Not a shallow court nod, but a real bow, slow, full, spine curved in respect. He rises with effort, knees creaking. You see the warrior again for a moment in his stance, in the way his eyes scan the room, but there's something different now. Softer, not weaker, like he's put down a weapon you didn't know he was carrying. He steps out, takes his sword, pauses. Then with deliberate care he brushes the dust off his geta sandals before walking away. Inside, the master pours a second bowl for himself this time. Some guests, he says, leave a weight behind like steam. You nod, you feel it too. A quirky tidbit floats around about one particularly refined samurai who refused to use any tea bowl unless it was cracked. He claimed the flaw made him drink more slowly, more honestly. You used to think that was just a metaphor. Now you're starting to think it might be strategy. Later, as you clean the space, you realize you've been holding your breath. You exhale slowly, imagining the residue of that encounter floating out into the garden like mist. The tea room holds silence again. But it's not the same silence. It's fuller now. It remembers. And so do you. The tools are spread out before you like relics from some serene, slightly obsessive religion. A whisk that looks like it was plucked from a hedgehog. A bamboo scoop so light it seems to float if you breathe too hard. A silk cloth that somehow manages to wrinkle from direct eye contact. And the bowl, always the bowl cradled like a fragile secret in your hands. These are not utensils, they are characters in the drama. And you still, half an apprentice, are somewhere between stagehand and understudy. This morning's task is formal, cleaning a ritual within the ritual. Not for sanitation, but for symbolism. You don't scrub, you purify. You don't wipe down. You compose. Each item has a story, a name, a lineage. The chashaku, or tea scoop, for instance, is carved from a single piece of aged bamboo. Yours is slightly curved, faintly charred on one end, and passed down from a former master who allegedly once stirred tea for a prince. It's called Moon's Spine, though no one remembers why. You whisper its name every time you unwrap it. It feels respectful, or maybe superstitious. The chasen, the whisk, is even more particular. It's carved from a single piece of white bamboo, 72 tines, not 71, not 73. You were once asked to count them. You did, twice. You still worry you got it wrong. This one has started to split slightly. The master says it's time to replace it. You feel irrationally sad, like losing a pet that never blinked. You'll burn it later in ceremony. Even discarding tools here is sacred. The Chawan tea bowl is arguably the star. Some are plain, others painted. Some so old the glaze has begun to ripple like water under moonlight. One in the collection is said to have survived an earthquake, a wedding, and a political assassination, all in the same year. You carry that one like it's filled with spirits. There are rules for each item. Never point the whisk toward the guest. Never let the scoop touch water. Never let your shadow fall over the bowl during purification. Why? Because that's the answer. Because this is how it's done, because it matters that it matters. Historians still argue whether these intricate tool traditions truly originated in the 12th century or were codified later during the golden age of tea in the 15th. But fragments of poetry, temple records, and diary entries suggest reverence for these objects was already well underway. After all, tea was more than drink. It was meditation, diplomacy, even a form of non-verbal rebellion. You remember a recent guest, a scholar from the capital, who paused before lifting the bowl and said, "Ah, the true host speaks through clay." Everyone laughed politely, but you saw the master smile just a bit too long. Each item has its own cloth for handling. You don't mix them. That would be like drying your face with your shoe. The fukusa, your primary cloth, is used for symbolic purification. It's folded in a sequence so elaborate that your fingers now twitch it out from muscle memory. When you first tried it, you tied a knot so complex the senior apprentice left it on display for 3 days as a cautionary tale. There's also the natsumi, the lacquered container for thin tea. Yours is black with a gold maple leaf light enough to vanish in a stiff breeze. Guests sometimes comment on it. You've practiced your nod for when they do. Not too proud, not too shy, just enough to say, "Yes, it is lovely," and "No, I didn't paint it myself." One quirky tidbit you learned recently: the tea scoop is often placed on the natsume in a specific angle meant to resemble a crane in flight. You didn't believe that until you looked closely one morning, and yes, it absolutely does. Now you can't unsee it. You've also heard of tea gatherings where the tools are passed around and discussed almost like artifacts at a museum. The bowl might be turned over admired for its foot, the circular ridge on its base, while guests murmur appreciatively. You used to think only emperors cared about such things. Now you find yourself doing it alone when no one's watching. Today the master lets you prepare the tools for the afternoon session, alone, unwatched. You unwrap each item with breath held, place them on the tatami in exact alignment, double-check angles, polish the scoop with your sleeve, adjust the whisk's prongs with a damp cloth. You catch your own reflection in the comma's curved surface and realize you're smiling. You know this is temporary. These tools aren't yours. You're just borrowing their trust for the afternoon. But still, it feels like you've been handed a story to carry, not to own, just to keep breathing. When the guests arrive, they don't comment on the layout. That's good. That's the goal. The tools should feel so inevitable they vanish, like moonlight, like a breeze. But after the guests leave, the master stands over the arrangement for a long moment. Then he says, "You're beginning to see their personalities." You don't answer. You don't have to. You bow, gently gather the tools, and whisper to each of them as you put them away. You step into the garden as if stepping into a painting, carefully, slowly aware that at any moment a rock might judge you. The tea house garden isn't a garden in the way most people think of it. It's not for lounging, not for picking flowers, and absolutely not for stepping wherever you please. It's called the roji or dew path, and walking through it is supposed to rinse your spirit before you ever touch a teacup. You begin your morning task raking the path. The rake is wooden, its tines uneven, not by accident. The goal is not a flawless pattern, it's balance, texture, the art of making chaos feel composed. You rake slowly, mindfully, tracing lines into the moss-speckled gravel. They vanish the moment the wind picks up, which is probably a metaphor for something frustratingly wise. Your senior says if your mind wanders, the lines will show it. You believe him mostly because your crooked trails always seem to coincide with flashbacks of your latest blunder. Stone lanterns dot the path Toro, with moss climbing up their sides like time itself is too polite to knock. You're not allowed to clean that moss. It's prized. In fact, when one apprentice wiped it off last year, he had to spend a week reciting nature poems while hand-weeding the koi pond. He never spoke again without checking the wind direction first. Historians still debate whether early tea gardens followed strict Zen design or emerged more organically from temple landscaping traditions. What's clear is that the 12th century roji wasn't decorative, it was spiritual infrastructure. The idea was to move through space as if shedding armor step by step, breath by breath. The path winds deliberately uneven. You can't rush it. That's the point. The stones, some smooth, others jagged, are placed so that you have to look down, move deliberately, avoid tripping. Every visitor walks this path before entering the tea house. It's not a corridor, it's a ritual, a cleansing, a test. If you stumble here, it means your mind's still stuck in the outside world. You've seen guests pause before the bamboo gate koshikake makiai, where they sit quietly on a stone bench listening, not for someone calling them, but for silence itself. Only then do they enter. Today, a breeze rustles the leaves. You pause to let a dragonfly land on the handle of the dipper near the sukubai, a low stone basin where guests wash their hands and rinse their mouths. The water trickles from a hollowed bamboo spout, cold, clean, a whisper that resets the senses. You fill the basin, not too much, not too little. Let the flow be constant but quiet. Nearby, a pine leans just slightly to the left. It's been trained that way for years, branches gently weighted, tied with silk cords in winter, coaxed like children. The result, a tree that looks effortlessly windswept. Effortlessly. That word doesn't exist in the tea garden. Every pebble is placed with intention. Every weed tolerated or removed based on how it plays against the composition. A single leaf might stay where it falls if it looks like it chose the spot. The tea master once told you the garden should feel like it's about to speak. You've waited years to understand that. But today, as you adjust the lantern just a hair's breadth and step back to see how the shadows change, you think you're beginning to hear the whisper. A quirky tale passed down through the apprentices. Once a powerful official visited a tea house garden and stepped off the stone path to examine a flower. The host didn't scold him. Instead, he removed the entire section of path the next day and replaced it with wild grass, saying it seems the flower had something to say. Passive-aggressive landscaping at its finest. You continue your slow patrol, clipping one branch here, brushing away a single petal there. Then you pause, as you always do, by the Yamabato stone, a flat gray slab said to resemble a dove's wing. No one knows who placed it, but the master insists it's the most important object in the entire garden. Not because of its shape, but because no guest has ever commented on it. You finish by wiping the bamboo ladle clean and placing it just so on the basin. Your shadow stretches long in the morning light. The air smells of damp stone and distant plum blossoms. As you step back inside, you pause to look once more at the path. The rake lines, the scattered moss, the echo of bird call. It's not a garden. It's a conversation you're just starting to understand. You don't realize how noisy your thoughts are until you're trained to hear steam. Not the sharp hiss of a boiling pot, but the gentle, just before it sings, exhale of water, perfectly heated, neither scalding nor sluggish, just ready. The master calls it the first breath. You're expected to recognize it. But today isn't about steam, it's about listening, not with your ears, but with all five senses. You're stationed at the back of the chashitsu, the main tea room, watching the master's hands as he prepares for a midday session. No guests yet, just the two of you, and the sounds. First, the kama, the cast iron kettle resting atop the hearth. The lid lifts with a delicate clink and a puff of invisible warmth. Not hot enough to fog your vision, just enough to carry the scent of metal and wood. Next, the scoop. Bamboo gliding over powdered green tea, whispering like dry brush on parchment. You've learned that if the powder sighs too much, it's been stored in damp conditions. If it's silent, it's stale. Perfect tea hums. Then comes the chasen, the bamboo whisk tapping against the inside of the bowl before its bristles bloom in water. That sound is soft, irregular, like someone slowly writing a letter they might never send. And finally, silence. But not the absence of noise. It's a presence, a mood, a padded pause in the room. The master waits for it like a musician before the first note. You wait too. This is what you've been trained to hear, and smell, and see. The aroma of tatami in summer, grassy and faintly toasted. The slight give of the mat beneath your knee. The brush of your sleeve against the floor as you bow. The light from the shoji panels shifting as clouds move above the garden. Historians still argue over how sensory detail was emphasized in the earliest forms of tea practice. Some believe the full focus on texture and scent developed later under formal Chinoyu schools. Others suggest this attentiveness was already inherent in monastic traditions borrowed from meditation and poetry and folded into tea. You believe it's always been here, maybe not in writing, but in the air. Your master once said, the tea should echo the season. That doesn't just mean serving chilled tea in summer or strong brews in winter. It means matching the mood of the season. If the rain is soft, your movements should be softer. If it's crisp outside, the clink of the bowl should feel like clear water on stone. Today the air is warm and still, summer almost tipping into autumn. The light has turned honey-colored to. Your task is to match it. You prepare a practice bowl. You don't look at the clock, there isn't one. You measure time by sound. The ladle tapping the edge of the kettle. The water spiraling into the bowl. The chastened flicking foam into form. You've learned to sense the water's heat through the scent it releases. If it smells metallic, it's too hot. If you can't smell anything, it's too cool. The ideal, a soft scent like distant rice fields after a drizzle. Even the cloth you use shaken has a sound when wrung. If it squeaks, you're rushing. If it drips, you didn't fold it right. You know now, you hear it. A quirky tradition floats among the senior apprentices during Tsukimi moon viewing season. Tea masters compete to brew the quietest bowl, not the best, the quietest. The winner once served tea so silently that no one realized the session had started until the bowl was in their lap. You're not there yet. Your whisk still clicks sometimes. Your fingers tremble when guests are too important, but you're starting to tune in. Later, the master hands you a set of incense sticks. Arrange them for tonight, he says. The scent is pale pine, maybe sandalwood, not overpowering. The goal isn't to dominate the room, it's to haunt it gently. You place the incense near the threshold, not in the center. That would be too obvious. The master adjusts it a finger's width. No comment, just the movement. You bow in thanks anyway. That night you sit in the tea room after the guests have gone listening. The kettle still sings faintly. The garden crickets chirp in overlapping rhythm. Your breathing slows. You begin to understand that the tea house is not a place to serve tea. It's a place to hear yourself serve tea and realize that even silence has temperature, texture, and tension. You close your eyes, and the room speaks back. You are being watched, not by people, not even by spirits, although some of the older apprentices insist they've seen a ghost or two lingering by the scroll alcove on moonless nights. No, today you are being watched by rules. They aren't written, they aren't posted, and they certainly aren't explained. They simply exist, woven into every inch of the tea house, like smoke into wood grain. Today you violate one. It's small, innocent even. You turn the tea scoop a beat too early. You don't think much of it at first. The scoop, light and familiar in your hand, makes its usual arc from the natsume to the bowl, but you rotate it just a breath too soon before the cloth has left the guest's sight. A misstep so subtle no visitor would catch it. But the master sees. Of course he sees. He doesn't frown, he doesn't pause. He just raises an eyebrow. That's worse. That means you know better, or at least you should. The silence that follows isn't angry. It's disappointed, heavy enough to flatten a crane. You complete the ceremony as if nothing happened. The guest leaves smiling, none the wiser. But as soon as the door slides shut, the master speaks. "Let me ask you," he begins gently, "have I ever told you not to turn the scoop at that moment?" "No, master." He nods. "And yet you did." You lower your gaze. There's no punishment, just quiet, but it echoes louder than any scolding. Here the rules aren't about obedience. They're about attention. You're not memorizing steps. You're reading mood, responding to breath, to pause, to the presence of others. The rules are living things, and today you failed to listen to one. Historians still argue whether the early practitioners of tea culture formalized these unspoken codes as early as the 12th century, or if they crystallized later with figures like Murata Juko. But even the oldest records speak of apprentices learning more from watching than from words. And what you're learning is this: nothing ruins harmony faster than trying to impress. You remember an old story about a tea master who refused to teach with his voice. When asked a question, he'd raise one hand by hand. If the student bowed, they understood. If they spoke, they didn't. You used to think that was lazy. Now it feels like wisdom. Today your tasks shift toward intangible service, being present without being seen. You manage the charcoal, quietly preparing the roe for later guests. You fold the fukusa again and again until your wrists ache. You open and close the sliding screens just to hear the sound they make. You practice pouring water, not for accuracy, but for tone. Is it too fast? Harsh. Too slow? Weak. Too loud? Distracting. Too soft? Insincere. There is apparently a correct emotion for pouring. Your senior nods approvingly once today. That feels like a birthday. At midday, a guest arrives with his young daughter. She's 5, maybe 6, restless. Her sleeves are too long for her arms, and she keeps tugging at them like they're made of bees. She's clearly not used to silence. She shifts, she sighs, she rocks back on her heels until one of the floorboards creaks a squeak so loud and sudden it feels like a kabuki drum roll. Everyone freezes. The father's eyes flash. He reaches for her, ready to scold. But the master intervenes softly, with a hand raised. "She is learning the rules," he says, "and so are we." The girl blushes. Her father lowers his head in apology. You, stunned, realize something: the rules bend for kindness. That afternoon you pay more attention to subtleties. How the older guests take their tea with a slight tremble in their hands, so you warm their bowls longer. How the light strikes the mat differently at dusk, so you adjust the angle of the scroll. No one tells you to do these things. No one claps. But the master passes behind you once and murmurs, "Better." It's the most praise you've received all month. A quirky tale goes around about a tea house where no one was allowed to speak above a whisper except during full moons. On those nights, the host would permit one joke, only one, and it had to involve a frog. No one knows why, but everyone swears the best jokes were rewarded with a second bowl of tea and a discreet wink. You wish that were true. You end your day writing down what you learned not in a scroll, but in your mind. You recite it like a poem while folding the same cloth you've folded 50 times already. Don't rush. Don't shrink. Read the room. Pour gently. Let silence fill what you cannot say. And if you must break a rule, break it with care. You extinguish the candle. The smoke curls upward like a ribbon, in no hurry to leave. You bow to the empty room, and you listen for the rules watching you in the dark. You've been told before that your job is to support the tea master. What they don't say, what no one writes down, is that you're also there to make him look like a deity gliding through time while holding a ladle. Today, the master performs a formal chaji, a full tea ceremony for high-ranking guests. It's not a casual sip and chat, it's an event, and your role to vanish. You arrive before dawn. The hearth has already been stoked. The charcoal is glowing softly, like the coals are still half asleep. The mats are swept, the scroll is changed. The flower arrangement irises today, thin and barely. There is set at just the right angle to suggest it fell that way, naturally. It didn't. You polish the ladles with a cloth so soft it practically apologizes to the bamboo. You are not nervous, you are beyond nervous. You are now in the realm of quiet dread, where even your heartbeat tries to tiptoe. Guests arrive one by one. The smell of incense changes as they enter the air, charged with expectation. These are not local nobles or curious poets. These are government men, landowners, ministers. One of them may or may not control a fleet of ships and a few provinces on the side. The master bows deeply. You bow deeper. You're the apprentice. If he becomes the floor, you become the earth below it. The performance begins. The master is a conductor of silence. Every motion, opening the tea caddy, wiping the rim of the bowl, pouring the water, is effortless, fluid, and absurdly slow, but not lazy slow, sacred slow. His hands move like ink painting the air. You move only when necessary. Refill water, replace cloth, glide in, glide out. Your footsteps are rehearsed. Your gaze is always downward. And then mid-ceremony the ladle slips. Not yours, his. It clinks against the rim of the comma just once. The sound is tiny, barely audible. But in this room, it's a shout. You freeze, but the master doesn't. Without pause, he completes the movement, retrieves the ladle with calm fingers, and places it aside with the same grace as if nothing ever happened. He doesn't even blink. If anything, he seems more deliberate afterward, as though orchestrating the mistake was part of the ceremony all along. The guests, one or two, exchange glances, but they say nothing. Because what would they say? That the master made an error? Impossible. What they saw was a teaching moment in disguise. A drop of imperfection in a bowl of perfection. Later, when the guests leave, the master sits beside the hearth. You hesitate, then you speak. Master, was it intentional? He looks at you, smiles, shrugs. Who can say? You're not sure if he's joking. Maybe he doesn't know either. Maybe it doesn't matter. Historians still argue whether tea masters embraced imperfection deliberately, or whether this evolved into wabi-sabi over time. Some scrolls suggest earlier ceremonies were far more rigid. Others praise intentional flaws, unpolished bowls, uneven pours as signs of depth and humility. All you know is that today, the master made a mistake feel like poetry. Later, you polish the ladle. It's fine, a small scratch maybe. Nothing fatal, but you handle it with reverence now, not because it's flawless, but because it reminded you that performance is not about perfection. It's about presence. You practice the cloth fold again. You realize how many things you've done today without thinking. The cloth moved correctly. The doors opened quietly. The tea foamed just right. But your mind, it had been busy judging, fussing, comparing. Now you try again, with attention. The fabric folds slowly. Clean lines, no tension. You place it down, you breathe. There's a story passed down of a master who hosted a tea ceremony in a shack. During a thunderstorm, the roof leaked, the fire sputtered, the bowl was chipped. At the end, his guest wept, not because anything went wrong, but because everything had. And it was still beautiful. You sit by the hearth now. The day's tea tools are cleaned. The room is empty, but the performance lingers. It always does. You touch the ladle's handle, smooth, familiar. You smile. Because now you understand something no one told you. Sometimes your job isn't to help the master succeed. Sometimes your job is to help him fail beautifully. Rain taps gently against the paper walls, and the entire tea room feels like it's breathing. Days like this, the slow, wet kind, draw a different crowd. Fewer nobles, more poets, monks, scholars, people who walk as if their thoughts are heavier than their umbrellas. They come not for ceremony but for atmosphere. They come to drink silence. You've been up since dawn, preparing for it, scrubbing the tatami, airing the fukusa, restocking the sweet trays with fresh chestnut jelly that glistens like storm water. You're soaked before the guests even arrive, but the master says this is your real education, serving a room when the world outside is dripping into it. The rain is steady, not dramatic, not moody, just present, persistent, like someone reciting a long story to no one in particular. By mid-morning, 4 guests arrive, 3 men, 1 woman. Their robes cling to their ankles. Their faces are soft with thought. They say little, a nod here, a sigh there. One of them carries a scroll wrapped tight in indigo silk. No one mentions it. They sit. The tea master greets them with fewer words than usual, then begins the ritual. Today the room feels different. Not heavier, not quieter, but deeper, like the walls have softened, soaked up the rain, and are now holding something secret. You bow and serve. The tea is slightly thicker today, koicha, instead of usucha, dark velvety, the kind that coats the tongue and slows the mind. It matches the sky. After the first round, the man with the scroll unrolls it beside the hearth. It's not a painting, it's a poem, written in brushed kanji so fluid it might have been spilled. He reads aloud. The words aren't profound. They're gentle, about moss and rain and a bird that forgot to leave for spring. You're not sure if he wrote it or if he's just delivering someone else's sorrow. But either way, the room listens. Even the master stops. Even the kettle holds its breath. Then the woman replies, not with a poem, but a question. She asks what kind of bird forgets spring. The room exhales. Someone chuckles. They begin composing verses casually, as if plucking thoughts from their sleeves. One writes about a stone too smooth for moss. Another about a leaf that misses its branch. None of it rhymes. None of it matters. It's just a game of mood. You serve the next round of sweets, ginger slices, candied so finely they crackle under your fingers. You move slowly, not to break the mood. The woman compliments the bowl you serve from Rain in the Valley, a celadon glazed piece with a crackle that resembles lightning. The name is older than the crack. Historians still argue whether poetry was truly part of early tea culture or a later addition as the samurai class grew more literary. But fragments of diaries, mostly monks and wandering scholars, hint at these rainy day sessions where tea and verse mingled without hierarchy. The master recites a line of his own. It's about steam. Everyone laughs, but politely. The master bows with mock solemnity, accepting that his metaphor about memory rising like vapor has not quite landed. You slip out to refresh the water basin. Outside, the rain has lightened. Drops hang like pearls on the pine needles. The garden smells sharper wet earth, wet stone, and a faint sweetness from the wind-blown plum blossoms. You watch a frog watching you. Back inside, another verse is born, this time about a roof tile with a view of the moon. You're starting to feel like the kettle should be credited as a co-author. One of the men asks to stay until dusk. The others murmur agreement. The master nods. You light more candles. Their glow pulses against the rain-streaked walls. There's a quirky tale of a tea master who held a rainy day session entirely in darkness. No candles, no scroll, only sound. His guests were given warm bowls to hold, but not to drink. The ceremony, he explained, has already happened in the rain. You never knew if that was a lesson or a warning. Tonight the guests linger, not for more tea, but for the atmosphere, the rain outside, the hush within. Someone begins to hum softly, a lullaby maybe, or just something to float the silence on. The master lets it happen. When they finally rise to leave, the scroll is rolled again, the verses tucked into sleeves, the poetry returned to thought. They bow deeply, and so do you. Afterward, you clean in silence. The bull rain in the valley rests in your hands. You dry it carefully as if the glaze might shift under your breath. The master speaks almost absently. The best tea, he says, tastes like weather. You nod, not because you understand, but because today you heard it too. The sun has dipped below the edge of the garden wall, and the last light drips into the room like honey. Evening in the tea house is not a time of closing, it's a time of deepening. The ceremony slows, the senses stretch. Conversations that were too brittle in daylight begin to soften at the edges. Tonight's guests arrive just as the crickets begin their chorus. Their sandals are dusted with the last light of day, their voices quieter than usual. Evening guests rarely come for tea alone. They come for what comes after, the space between sips, the philosophical detours, the permission to drift. The room is dim, but deliberately so. You've lit only a few lanterns, one in the tokonoma, one near the kettle, one beside the door. Their light is amber and soft, catching only parts of faces, throwing long shadows on the tatami. The rest left to imagination. You've placed a scroll with just a single character, Jing Shizu, meaning stillness. A subtle message, maybe a warning. The tea master doesn't smile tonight, not because he's tense, but because he's paying attention in a different way. His motions are slower than usual, almost meditative. He prepares the utensils like a man counting memories. You mimic his pace, each footstep measured, each turn of the bowl precise. You can feel the room's rhythm shift to match the fading sky. There's a kind of intimacy that only arrives with candlelight. One guest, a scholar you've seen before, leans slightly closer as the tea is served. Not toward anyone in particular, just toward the center of the room as though drawn by gravity. Another speaks after his first sip. Isn't it strange, he says, that this bowl will never again taste exactly like this? The others nod. One murmurs, like trying to remember a dream as you wake. They are not trying to be profound. That's what makes it work. Historians still argue whether tea ceremonies at dusk were reserved for certain guests or simply emerged from necessity. But letters from this period, some from monks, others from retired courtiers, hint at late evening gatherings where tea was less about form and more about reflection. You've come to love these sessions. They feel like walking through memory. Tonight the master serves koicha thick tea poured like ink. The bowl he chooses is wide, heavy, and plain. It drinks slowly, no chatter, just breath and warmth. After the second round, someone asks a question not about tea, but about life. If a man changes once, is he the same man? No one answers. The master pours more water into the kettle. The sound is steady, a background hum. The question lingers like steam. Eventually, a woman guest responds not with philosophy, but with a story about a mountain path she took in spring that looked completely different in autumn. I didn't change, she says, but the path made me walk differently. Someone else hums agreement. You serve the final sweet, a rice dumpling dyed blue with butterfly pea flour. It's delicate, a little too soft, but somehow perfect for this moment, like something meant to disappear. The master tells a story next rare for him. He speaks of a tea master who used to hold silent sessions in a cave. His guests would arrive, drink, and leave without saying a word. When asked why, he'd simply say, "The world speaks too much already." You don't know if the tale is true, but in this room under this light, you believe it. There's a quirky tradition you've only heard whispered during certain new moons. A tea master might serve a bowl upside down, not to confuse the guest, but to see how they respond to reversal. Some would laugh, others would panic. One supposedly thanked the host for the reminder that even emptiness has a top and bottom. As the session ends, no one rushes to leave. The guests linger, sipping not tea but silence. Their bodies relax, their voices low. You imagine this is what it feels like to stand still in a river's current. Eventually the candles begin to flicker. One by one they're extinguished, not abruptly, just gently, as though bowing out. You slide the door open for the final guest. He bows deeply. You return it. Then he says, "You serve quiet very well." You don't respond. You simply bow again. Later, you and the master sit beside the hearth. No lessons, no corrections, just the two of you and the soft hiss of the last coals. He says tea at night is never about the tea. You nod, and somehow you understand. You're sweeping the floor near the tokonoma when you hear it. A whisper, a breath, a name. Not yours, not anyone you recognize, but it's definitely a name low urgent, dropped in a hush that was supposed to be silent. You pause. You're not meant to hear anything near the scroll alcove. That's a sacred space, a zone of aesthetic reverence, not gossip. But here it is again, just audible enough to carry through the paper walls. You freeze. Two guests sit in the corner near the scroll. Their heads are close, too close for formality. One leans in with the practiced posture of someone used to sharing important, maybe illicit information under the cover of respectability. This isn't the first time you've heard whispers in this corner. You've just never been this close. You crouch slightly, pretending to adjust the floor mat. The land transfer is already underway, one says. But he doesn't know. A breath. He will soon. A sip of tea follows as though punctuation. The sound is delicate, calculated, and terrifying. You straighten and back away, slowly, silently. This is not your business, not your world. but the tea house is a magnet for conversations that have no home elsewhere. That's part of its unspoken purpose. While the front of the ceremony offers calm and grace, the edges shimmer with secrets. Historians still debate how involved tea houses were in political maneuvering during the 12th century. Some argue they were neutral ground. Others believe they were power chambers in disguise, safe places to exchange ideas, offers, or threats behind the veil of shared silence. You're beginning to lean toward the latter. There's something about the tea room, the enforced stillness, the mandatory humility, that makes even the most dangerous truths feel whisperable. You don't shout secrets into wind. You pour them into cups, sip slowly, and let the implications steep. You finish sweeping. The scroll today features a calligraphy piece that translates to "a still pond reflects the deepest sky." Funny, considering what's just rippled underneath it. The woman sitting beside the men catches your eye as you move past. Her expression is unreadable. Not blank, just too carefully composed. She sips her tea slowly, watching you over the rim, not threatening, not warm, just noting. You bow deeply and vanish into the side chamber to refresh the water basin. When you return, the guests are gone, but the scroll still hangs, and now it feels different. There's a quirky tale the senior apprentice once shared during a tea gathering. A guest supposedly left a folded note under the bowl. The message, a poem, but written in code. The host discovered it later, read it once, and never spoke of it again. When asked, he replied, "Some flavors aren't meant to be shared." You've come to understand that tea rooms don't just host guests, they remember them, not by name, but by weight, energy. What was said or not said settles in the walls. Later, when the master enters the room to prepare for the evening, he pauses near the tokonoma, looks at the scroll, then glances at you. He doesn't ask if you heard anything. He just says, "Dust travels farther when the floor is still." You bow and spend the rest of the evening wondering what he meant. You're sick, not gravely so, just enough that your joints feel like they're filled with mochi, your head is packed with fog, and your nose could politely flood a rice paddy. A common cold, most likely, though in the 12th century, even a cold comes with existential implications. You wake shivering. Your blanket clings to you like a wet leaf. The first breath you take smells like cedar and misery. But sickness doesn't excuse you from formality. You still kneel by the sliding door and bow to the master, who glances once at your flushed cheeks and leaking eyes, then nods in a way that says, "Yes, I see you. And yes, you look like you've wrestled a bucket of pond water. Go sit." You're not assigned a ceremony today. Instead, you're allowed to rest in the back chamber technically. In practice, this means folding cloths at half speed and trying not to sneeze on the tea scoop. Every apprentice gets sick eventually. The tea room is not a sterile space. It's warm, shared, and filled with guests who breathe philosophy and cough discreetly behind their fans. But illness doesn't suspend grace. If anything, it requires more of it. You're given ginger water instead of tea, steamed rice with pickled radish, a damp cloth for your head. Even the silence today seems softer, like the room knows not to creak too loudly. There's an unspoken etiquette around being sick in the tea room. No dramatics, no complaining. You bow slightly more often. You breathe through your mouth. You move like fog, not wind. Historians rarely mention illness in early tea practice, possibly because the scrolls focused on ideals, not human frailty. but diaries from temple novices mention fever bowing and the kindness of warm floors. So it's safe to assume that even in a space built for elegance, the sniffles got their moment. You remember a story: one tea master caught a chill and conducted an entire ceremony while wrapped in a fox fur shawl. When guests questioned the break in aesthetic, he said, "Even the moon wears clouds." You've never liked that quote until now. Today, the master prepares a bowl of tea himself. For you, not in performance, not in practice, but in quiet generosity. He doesn't call attention to it. He doesn't invite the room to watch. He simply kneels beside your mat and offers it with two hands. You're too surprised to bow properly. He doesn't seem to mind. The bowl is rough-fired clay, warm to the touch, simple in a way that feels sincere. You sip. It's strong, hot, a bit too thick. You love it. "Good," he says. "That's it." You don't speak, you can't. But in that moment you understand something important. Hospitality doesn't pause for imperfection. It leans into it. The rest of the day passes in a blur of soft footsteps and dripping noses. Another apprentice brings you a folded haori to rest on. Someone else sets a small charcoal brazier near your feet. They don't speak. No one mocks you. Illness here is not weakness. It's simply part of the weather. By evening, you're sweating slightly less. Your nose has reduced its campaign for independence. You begin folding tea cloths again slowly, carefully. You even catch your reflection in the kettle and think, "Okay, maybe I don't look like I've been exercised," mid-bow. A quirky tale floats among the apprentices once a guest coughed during a tea ceremony, and instead of pausing, the host incorporated it into the rhythm, pouring water at the exact beat of each hack. By the end, the guest had stopped coughing entirely. They say the host cured him through rhythm alone. You want to believe it. Tonight you kneel by the fire for just a moment longer, not to impress anyone, just to feel its warmth in your bones. The master walks past and murmurs, "Even a leaking roof shelters." You bow slower than usual, but deeper. You may not be at your best, but in this house that's still enough to be offered tea. You're not allowed to speak. Not because you're in trouble, though. Last week's ladle spill did earn you 3 days of side-eye, but because today you're shadowing the master in silence. Listening is the lesson, or more accurately, listening without judging. It sounds simple. It is not. Guests arrive in pairs, old friends perhaps. They bow deeply, exchange greetings, and settle onto the tatami with the ease of men who have disagreed before and plan to again. The master prepares tea. You, kneeling in the side chamber, observe without blinking. Your hands rest on your knees. You are a piece of the room, not a participant. The first man, taller, dressed in ochre robes with stiff embroidered edges, begins to speak. His voice is soft, but pointed. The drought has not ended. The patties crack. The second man, shorter, wiry, with a voice like wind through pine needles, replies, "Perhaps they are simply thirsty for change." The bowl passes between them, and tea is sipped not for comfort but for pacing. It becomes clear very quickly, this is not small talk. This is court talk, policy talk, landowner to landowner maneuvering disguised as philosophical musing. Your role is to listen, not to the words, to the air around them, the pauses, the slight tightness when a guest says we must move carefully, the moment the master raises the kettle lid just long enough to cut short a brewing argument. This is the art of listening without judging, hearing motives, weighing silence, sensing the weight behind Historians rarely credit tea houses as political instruments, But you begin to understand why some temples were wary of them. Where words were few, meaning bloomed. Power didn't need a sword, it only needed a second bowl. Later, the second guest says something you barely catch. And if the Shuin refuses a beat, then he won't. You're not supposed to know what they mean, but you do. The tea bowl is returned, rinsed, dried. The room breathes again. The guests thank the master. They don't thank you. That's fine. You're still part of the silence they just used to negotiate something dangerous. After they leave, you gather the utensils slowly. The master speaks for the first time all day. You looked worried. You bow, then answer truthfully, "I didn't understand everything." He nods. "Then you were listening well." You blink. There's a kind of hearing, he continues, that isn't about facts. It's about temperature. How cold a voice is. How warm a refusal. You think of the way the guest's hand lingered on the bowl's rim, as though reluctant to let go of something that had no words. You nod. A quirky tale surfaces in your memory. A tea apprentice once served a guest who refused to drink. Everyone waited. The host said nothing. Finally, the guest explained, "I'm not thirsty for tea. I'm thirsty for being heard." The master bowed and sat in silence with him for an hour. No tea was ever made, and the guest left in tears. You never really understood that story before, but today you do. After cleaning, the master asks you to prepare a practice bowl. You whisk quietly. The water temperature is perfect. The foam settles evenly. You offer it to him. He sips, closes his eyes, and says, "You didn't try to impress me." You smile even as you bow, because that apparently is the goal. The monks arrive at sunrise, barefoot, rain-speckled, and humming like bees who've read too much poetry. There are 3 of them today, robes the color of dried earth expressions, unreadable beneath shaved heads and tired smiles. They come bearing gifts, a bundle of persimmons, a hand-copied scroll of koans, and a folded linen cloth that smells like wood smoke and pine. You bow low, forehead to mat. They bow in return, slightly out of sync with each other, which makes you feel less alone in your imperfections. The master greets them with the familiarity of an old friend who still insists on formality. Their dialogue is spare, mostly nods and gestures, and the occasional phrase that sounds like the start of a riddle. You're not sure if that's intentional or if monks just speak in proverbs to save time. Today's tea session is different. Not slower, not stricter, just emptier. As if the ceremony is happening behind the scenes of something larger and quieter that you can't quite see. The kettle hums. The incense is subtler by Akudan sandalwood favored by temples. The flower in the tokonoma isn't a flower at all, but a single stone with moss trailing over it like a small green waterfall. The scroll reads, "Wu Mu," nothingness. The room seems to expand inward when you look at it. Your job today is to serve without intruding, to float, not walk, to listen, not interpret. The master prepares tea with a pace you've never seen before, not slow exactly, more absent of speed, like his hands are moving on a different axis of time. The monks observe in silence. When the bowl is passed, it's received not with a bow but with a breath. One of the monks, older, with a scar running along the base of his throat, sips, then holds the bowl as if warming a prayer. He doesn't drink again, he just holds it. The others sip, pass, sit. No one speaks for a long while. Then what is the sound of tea not being poured? The younger monk asks. A moment of stillness. The middle monk replies, the echo of a cup that was never filled. Everyone nods. like this is perfectly reasonable. You glance at the master. His mouth twitches almost a smile, or indigestion. With him, it's hard to tell. Historians still debate the extent to which Zen Buddhism shaped early tea practices. Some argue the tea house borrowed Zen's aesthetics, but not its metaphysics. Others claim the entire ceremony is a walking koan structured to make you drop logic and taste clarity. What's clear is that when monks are present, the line between form and philosophy dissolves like sugar in hot water. The older monk sets down the bowl and closes his eyes. Then, to no one in particular, he says there is a fire in the hearth that never burns out, but it warms only those who don't look directly at it. You write that down in your mind instantly, unsure if it means something or nothing, or both. You serve the sweet slices of dried persimmon dusted with roasted rice powder. The monks eat with precision, not hunger, not politeness, just attention. One of them drops a crumb. He bows to it, then picks it up and eats it. You do not laugh. Barely. Later they help clean the room. This is not expected, but not unwelcome. One monk sweeps the threshold humming a temple chant that matches the creak of the floorboards. Another rinses the basin. The third simply sits by the door, eyes closed, as if watching something through his eyelids. The tea master joins him. Neither speaks. Eventually, the monk says the bowl was empty. The master replies, and still it overflowed. You bow, unsure if that's a cue for anything. It isn't. There's a quirky tale about a monk who once refused tea because the cup of my mind is already full. The host reportedly poured tea anyway. The monk complained. The host poured more. The monk shouted. The host smiled. Now, he said, you understand. You wonder if that happened. You also wonder if it even matters. The monks leave as they arrived quietly, respectfully, and with the impression that they've stolen nothing but taken everything. The master turns to you. What did you learn? You hesitate, then say that even silence needs practice. He nods. Then softly, and sometimes nothing is the answer. Summer arrives like a shout muffled under layers of etiquette. The heat clings to the walls, thick and intimate. Tatami mats grow warm under your knees. The kettle sweats before you do. The scent of old cedar sharpens. Even the birds in the garden chirp less, as if they, too, are trying not to perspire. But with summer comes the season's greatest gift, festivals. And with the festivals come guests who are different. They arrive draped in color saffron robes, red silk obi patterns that shimmer like koi in sunlight. Their sleeves are long enough to sweep dust without trying. Their hair smells like camellia oil and fireworks. Their voices are light, sometimes a little too loud for the tea room's taste. But no one stops them, because today is for celebration, not silence. Outside, the village paths are hung with lanterns glowing like floating moons. Children chase fireflies. Vendors shout about grilled eel and pickled ginger on sticks. Music drifts through the trees, flutes, taiko drums, the occasional off-key shamisen that someone probably thought better of too late. Inside, you're sweating through your robe and trying not to visibly melt. You serve tea slowly, carefully. The guests fan themselves, talk about the heat, and smile in that open festival kind of way that makes even silence feel friendly. They compliment the flowers, the bowl, the sweets, candied yuzu, today bright and sticky. Then one of them, a young woman with laugh lines already etched near her eyes, asks the master, "Have you ever been in love?" The room stops. It's not a scandalous question, just an unexpected one. Tea houses are built on restraint, and love is a word that wriggles too much for traditional tatami. The master sets down his cloth. He considers, then says once, briefly, "She left." The bowl remained. No one presses further. That's already more than he usually gives. And just like that, the conversation opens like a fan. Guests talk about missed connections, a love letter hidden in a lacquer box, a summer night that never led to autumn. They speak softly like untying knots. You serve another round. The tea is thinner today, usucha pale and frothy like morning mist after a humid night. It cools the tongue just enough. The youngest guest, a boy barely older than you, leans forward and says, "This place feels like it never changes." You almost reply, but you don't, because you've begun to learn when silence is the correct answer. Historians still argue whether seasonal celebrations truly influenced early tea practice. Some claim summer ceremonies were simplified, made less formal due to heat. Others argue they became more performative because summer guests were often of higher status and expected entertainment. Either way, emotion had a tendency to sneak in when cicadas hummed. The scroll today reads, "Fangling Furin Wind Chime." It sways in the breeze above the garden, its soft clink punctuating the laughter that now fills the tea room. After the formal session ends, the guests are invited to linger. The master plays a small wooden flute. Not well, not terribly, just enough. The guests hum along. Someone suggests a game: fold a wish into a strip of paper, tie it to the garden's bamboo. You participate quietly. Your wish is private. You fold it wrong the first time. No one notices. A quirky story. You remember one tea house used to host a secret midsummer gathering where guests weren't served tea but water, clear, cold from a mountain spring. They drank in silence, then each whispered a secret into the empty bowl. The host would wash the bowls afterward and claim to pour their secrets into the soil. You wonder what the tatami in your tea house has heard by now. As the sky darkens, fireflies blink in the garden. The master extinguishes the hearth not with water, but with a fan, folding the coals into ash as gently as if tucking in a child. Guests bow. Thank you. Some linger, some don't. One slips you a persimmon sweet as she leaves. When everyone's gone, you kneel in the quiet. The sweat on your back cools into shivers. You look out at the garden where someone's wish flutters gently on a bamboo stalk. You can't read it from here, but it's enough to know it's there. The room has been swept 3 times already. The tatami has been checked for loose fibers. The scroll has been replaced calligraphy. Only no painting, something ambiguous enough to be interpreted 20 different ways, which is exactly the point. The hearth is lit, but not roaring. The chabana, today's flower arrangement, is sparse, one pale reed and a blade of grass arched like a question. You're pacing inside yourself, because today the guest is someone powerful, someone with retainers, someone with political weight that doesn't speak in grams, it speaks in titles. The shogun's advisor is coming. Not the shogun himself, that would be too much, but his left hand, the man behind the man, the one who can grant land, silence a rumor, or make a scroll disappear forever. The tea house is ready, but are you? You're assigned to assist from the side room. No whisking, no pouring. But every utensil that passes through the master's hands will have been prepped by yours. You're polishing metal with silk, adjusting placements to the width of a rice grain, counting each breath between motions. And still your palms sweat. When he arrives, you can't even see him fully. He's just a shadow behind the sliding door. But the energy shifts. His steps are slow, careful, calculated. like the placement of chess pieces. His robe whispers wealth. The air compresses. Everyone lowers their gaze a fraction deeper than usual. The master greets him with perfect neutrality, neither deferent nor cold. You've seen him prepare tea for farmers and monks with the same exact bow. But today you catch the slightest pause before he pours the first ladle of water. Even he feels it. The silence in the room becomes theatrical. It's not just quiet, it's staged. Every breath is a line of dialogue, every motion a statement. The tea bowl chosen is heavy iron brown without ornament. A clear message: this is not a party. The shogun's advisor says very little. His voice, when he does speak, is like a wooden gate swinging shut. Strong tea today, he says, though you don't know if that's approval or accusation. The master nods. It reflects the wind. That could mean anything. It probably does. Historians still debate whether tea houses in this period were truly neutral grounds or simply quieter arenas for political theater. But here and now you understand why such men visit. Not for tea, for control. Because in this room you can't shout, demand, or threaten. You have to perform. And performance reveals far more than command ever could. Halfway through the ceremony, the advisor turns to the scroll in the tokonoma. He squints. What does it mean, he asks. The master smiles faintly. That depends who you ask. The advisor nods. I ask you. You hold your breath. The master pauses, not long, just enough. Then says, it means even silence has a shape. The advisor lets out the faintest exhale. It could be a laugh or a warning. No one moves. Then he sips the tea and bows. The air shifts again, not relaxed, but released. You bring in the sweets plum jelly with gold leaf, rare, expensive, but restrained, a treat that doesn't try too hard, the kind of detail someone like him would notice and respect. He finishes. He thanks the master. He says nothing else. But as he exits, just before ducking through the door, he turns slightly and says, tell your apprentice they handled the whisk like a diplomat. You weren't even holding the whisk. But you nod, deeply. Later, the master says nothing for a long time. Then finally he mutters, he's not wrong. You grin into your tea cloth. A quirky tale. You once heard a tea master supposedly served a powerful general using a chipped bowl. When questioned, he replied, only flawed bowls show the color of real tea. The general was so moved he left his sword behind. You suspect that story's embroidered, but today you believe in the stitch. The light outside is gold when you finally sweep the room again. The scroll still hangs. The silence remains. You didn't speak today, but somehow you were heard. It happens in slow motion, the kind of slow that only exists when disaster is tripping toward you on tiptoes. The guest is mid-bow. He rises, graceful, elegant, and then his foot catches the edge of the tatami. There's a sharp crack as his knee meets the floor, followed by a teacup-sized gasp from everyone in the room. The guest topples forward, arms flailing, body folding in a way that is neither poetic nor pain-free. You freeze. The bowl he was holding doesn't shatter. Miraculously, it rolls, hits the edge of the hearth, and comes to rest upright, steaming, somehow still dignified. The guest not so much. He's sprawled across the mat, clutching his wrist, which he insists is fine in the way that clearly means probably not fine. His carefully arranged robe is twisted like a startled curtain. His hairpin is on the other side of the room. A small, sad clump of sweet rice clings to his sleeve. And you're already moving. Not to fix, not to fuss. That would be a greater insult. Your job is to respond without turning it into a scene. You retrieve the fallen items without comment. You offer a damp cloth, not a question. You fold his sleeve back into shape like you've done it 100 times. The master, meanwhile, says nothing, just gestures subtly for the session to continue. And it does. Because the tea room, for all its precision and perfection, knows how to bend. The guest stays, drinks the next bowl with his good hand, even chuckles at his own clumsiness. The others follow suit. And you learn something. Grace isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about absorbing them without rippling the entire pond. Later, while folding cloths in the side room, you overhear one of the guests whisper, "Do you think he did that on purpose?" A test. Historians still argue whether early tea houses embraced imperfection or merely tolerated it, but many agree that the concept of yohaku, blank space, the allowance for error, was a quiet but crucial part of early aesthetics. To host a flawless tea session, impressive. To recover from a flawed one, enlightened. The master sits you down afterward. "Do you know what you did right?" he asks. You shake your head. "You didn't apologize," he says. "You're confused." Apology centers the mistake, he explains. Silence centers the guest. You bow. You remember a story told by a former apprentice about a noblewoman who once dropped her teacup in front of the emperor's envoy. The host didn't flinch. Instead, he spilled a few drops from his own bowl, mimicking her accident, and said, "Ah, the spirit of the rain is generous today." She wept. He became famous. You used to think that story was romanticized. Now you just hope you'll learn that level of improvisation. That night, you clean the fallen guest's bowl. It's fine, a slight chip on the lip, barely noticeable. You set it aside, wondering if the master will still use it. He walks by. "Keep it," he says. "It tells a story now." You cradle it in both hands, not as an artifact of failure, but as proof that perfection is not the goal. Presence is. Today you are learning to do nothing. Not rest, not sleep, not dawdle or stall. Actual, disciplined, intentional nothing. It begins at sunrise when the master tells you your only task is to sit in the tea room and not move. Not serve, not clean, not arrange flowers, just exist. Present, still. You're thrilled at first. A day off. In the tea room, this will be easy. You are so wrong. 10 minutes, and your knees ache. 15, your thoughts have wandered to whether rice crackers count as a legitimate meal. 20, you start obsessing over whether the calligraphy scroll is slightly tilted. 30, you feel the overwhelming primal urge to rearrange the ladle's angle on the brazier. You resist. Barely. The master passes by and glances at you. No words. Just a single raised brow that says, "Yes, this is part of your training, and no, I will not save you from it." So you breathe. You start to notice things. How the light shifts across the tatami in slow golden stripes. How the sound of your own breath seems too loud. How the kettle doesn't boil, it builds like an exhale that never quite finishes. You realize you're not bored, you're impatient. A different thing entirely. And gradually the room stops feeling like a performance stage and starts feeling like a container, a bowl of space. You're inside it, held, witnessed. The master calls this the space between things. The pause that gives meaning to movement. It is not emptiness. It is presence that waits. Historians often skip over when they write about early tea culture because it doesn't translate well into Western frameworks. You can't touch it. You can't quote it. But every motion in the ceremony exists in response to it. You're beginning to hear it now, the same way you hear the silence after a bell rings. After an hour, the master enters and silently performs a brief tea preparation. No guests, no ceremony, just one bowl. He finishes, doesn't drink it, and sets it in front of you. Observe, he says. You look. It's ordinary. The whisk slightly askew, the foam uneven, and yet there's something complete about it, like it meant to be imperfect, like it is enough. He says, now you understand the lesson. You ask, which one? He replies, yes. You don't even groan. Later, you prepare your own bowl in silence. You make no attempt to be impressive. You simply move through the steps as if brushing dust off your own thoughts. The bowl turns out better than usual. The foam is right. The angle is good. You don't feel proud. You feel present. A quirky tale from your early days resurfaces. A tea master once hosted an entire session in which no tea was served. The guests were confused but remained polite. At the end, he bowed and said, you drank exactly what you brought with you. One guest reportedly never returned. The others came back every week. Today, you think you finally understand why. By sunset, your knees are sore, your back is tight, and your thoughts are quieter than they've ever been. You clean up slowly, aware of every creak in the floorboards, every brush of cloth against bamboo. The master, now seated beside the hearth, says only one thing before nightfall. Now that you've done nothing, you're ready to begin. You bow and feel like a door just opened. You don't know you're ready until you're told you are. It happens early in the morning with no warning. The master calls you by name, your real name, not just apprentice, and says simply, you'll host the midday ceremony. You bow, you nod, you don't breathe for 12 full seconds. This isn't practice. This isn't setting trays or folding cloths under supervision. This is your first real tea gathering, with real guests, with a real scroll chosen by you, with no excuses. The master says no more, just leaves you standing there with the full weight of silence pressing down like steam. You begin preparations, slowly, carefully, not nervously, intentionally. You sweep the room not to clean, but to calm it. You choose a single flower, a white camellia beginning to wilt at one edge. It feels honest. The scroll reads, Yi chi I hui, ichi go ichi I. One time, one meeting. You've seen it before. You've never felt it like this. You rehearse everything. Fold the fukusa, pour the water, whisk the air. You hold the shawan like it's full of breath, your own. When the guests arrive, you bow deeply. You don't look up too quickly. You remember you are not the center. The tea is. The room is. The space between you is. You kneel. And you begin. Water, scoop, powder, whisk. The bowl you serve isn't perfect. The foam is slightly thicker than usual. The whisk was one breath too fast. But your hands are steady. Your eyes are soft. Your presence is real. The first guest receives the bowl, bows, turns it, drinks. He closes his eyes. When he opens them, he smiles. And that's when you finally start to believe you're no longer pretending. Each guest receives their bowl. You move like breath. Your thoughts quiet. The rhythm finds you instead of you finding it. The sweets are plum and yuzu. You chose them this morning on instinct. They land well. There is quiet conversation, gentle nods, no critique, no praise. Just a shared calm like a ripple passed from bowl to bowl. You bow at the end, slowly, fully, and one of the guests says softly, that felt like a memory. You don't answer, but your chest feels warm in the way only sincerity creates. Historians don't always capture these moments the first time an apprentice becomes a host. There are records of tea masters and their grand sessions, but rarely do the scrolls document the smaller triumphs, the ones that happen in the hush between not ready and you did it. After the guests leave, you clean everything yourself. No one helps. You want to feel each surface again. The bowl is warm, the scoop is dry, your whisk has softened slightly from use. The master watches from the corner, says nothing, but he does something unusual. He pours a bowl for you. You sit together, no words. You drink the tea slowly. It tastes different when you're the one being served. It tastes generous, like effort transformed into ease. There's a story passed down about a tea master who, upon completing his first perfect ceremony, broke his favorite bowl on purpose. When asked why, he said, "Because perfection is too heavy to carry. You're not ready to smash anything today, but you understand the weight." Later that night, you wrap your utensils for storage. You place them not just in their silk pouches, but into memory. Your hands move slowly, not from fatigue, from reverence. This was the day you stepped into a tradition older than names, and didn't just serve tea, you served peace. The old man arrives just after dawn, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane, his sleeves too long, his sandals mismatched. He bows deeper than his back seems capable of. You rush to help him, but he waves you off with a crooked smile that says, "I've bowed longer than you've been alive." He doesn't speak much, just hands you a small cloth bundle inside a folded letter and a single smooth stone with an ink-brushed character faint from age. You bow. He nods. That seems to be the full exchange. You pass it to the master, who holds the stone in his palm for a long while, then says almost to himself, "He's returned." Only later do you understand this guest isn't just old. He's the master's master. Retired, nearly forgotten, living now in the mountains where the wind writes more than he does. And today he's come for a final ceremony. There's no announcement, no fanfare, just 3 guests, quiet ones, plus you and the master, who moves today with a kind of hush that goes beyond silence. The utensils are familiar, but chosen differently. The bowl is thick-walled, dark green, with a lip chipped just enough to be loved. The scroll simply says, "Kulai kyo rai," come and go. You help with the preparations, but everything is slower. The water simmers, not boils. The incense curls in longer loops. Even the guests speak in whispers they seem to forget halfway through. The old man doesn't bow often, but when he does, it's complete. No hesitation, no show. He drinks the tea with both hands as if it weighs more than anything he's ever held. Then he sets the bowl down, looks directly at the master, and nods. The master bows lower than you've ever seen him bow. Nothing is said. Nothing needs to be. Later, as the guests depart, the old man stays behind. The master kneels beside him. They speak so softly you can't hear it through the wall. Just the cadence, 2 old friends sorting through time, laughter once, then stillness, then nothing. Eventually, the master returns alone. You do not ask. He picks up the stone the old man brought, sets it in the garden beside the basin. No announcement, just placement. Then says, "He taught me how to wait." You remember the way the old man's eyes moved slowly like clouds over a mountain, not searching, just noticing. And now the space he leaves behind feels larger somehow. That night, the master performs a solo ceremony, just for himself. You are allowed to watch. It's the same movements, same tools, same rhythm, but something is different. It's the first time you see him lift the bowl, not for instruction or performance, but for memory. And when he drinks, there's no performance in the posture. no lesson tucked inside, just farewell. Historians might never write about this day. There won't be scrolls about the final bow of a retired master, but the tea room will remember. In the way the light hits the basin, in the placement of a stone, in the silence that now carries the weight of 2 generations. A quirky tale flickers in your mind of a tea master who, when asked where his lineage scroll was, pointed to a kettle and said, "It's stored in the way steam rises." You used to laugh at that. Now you nod, because today you saw a tradition not passed, but bowed into the floor itself. The seasons shift quietly in a tea house. Not all at once. There's no trumpet blast of spring, no fireworks announcing fall. Just a change in the light, a longer shadow at dawn, a cooler breath in the morning air. You start to notice the way steam curls differently. In autumn, slower and lower, like it's reluctant to leave the bowl. You've been here a long time now, longer than you expected. Long enough that your knees don't complain as much. Your folds are straight the first time, and the ladle in your hand no longer feels borrowed. You've changed, but the tea house hasn't. The mats still creak in the same places. The scrolls still rotate in their quiet rhythm. The kettle still sings its lonely, loyal tune, and yet the silence between each ritual now feels like an old friend, one that doesn't need to speak to say everything. Today there is no guest, no ceremony, just you. You sweep the room as always, straighten the tools, arrange the flowers, wild grasses, and a single slanting camellia. The master enters. He says only this: "Serve me a bowl." That's all. No instruction, no correction, not even a raised brow. You move. You don't rush. You don't pause for dramatic effect. You don't second guess. You trust the hands that have done this hundreds of times before. Water, scoop, whisk, wipe, pour. The tea is neither perfect nor imperfect. It simply is, and that you realize is the goal. You offer it with both hands. The master takes it, drinks, then nods. He sets the bowl down gently. "You're no longer an apprentice," he says. You bow, but deeper than usual, not for him, for the room, for the tea, for the version of yourself who once trembled holding a cloth in this exact spot. The master walks outside, and you stay kneeling beside the hearth. Steam rises. The walls glow with late afternoon sun. The quiet doesn't demand anything from you now. It just sits with you. You rise finally, slide the door open, and step into a garden that seems just a little more yours than yesterday. Not because you own it, but because now you know how to walk through it. Now the light fades and the tea room grows quiet again, only this time you're not a guest or an apprentice. You're simply someone who knows how to move slowly through the world. The steam softens, the mats cool, the last incense coil has burned down to ash. And outside, the wind brushes the bamboo leaves like a memory you don't need to hold too tightly anymore. You've learned to listen to silence, to fold time into motion, to bow not just with your body, but with your whole breath. So take a long, gentle inhale now, and exhale just as slowly. Let your body feel the weight of the floor beneath you. Let your shoulders drop. Let the hush of the tea house settle around you like a robe warmed by evening. There's no need to remember every detail. The feeling will stay with you, even in dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.